Always true.
I'm Lucia Newman in Havana. As the spotlights remain fixed on the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, here in the Cuban capital, as across all of the largest island in the Caribbean, the lights are going out. Not because of missiles, but because of sanctions. Acute sanctions. Cuba is not at war, but it is in a political conflict with the United States. The island depends on imported oil to keep its power plants running. But the U.S. government has moved to choke off that supply, pressuring countries and companies not to provide fuel, threatening sanctions, and effectively stopping shipments from reaching Cuban ports. Without fuel, there's no electricity. Without electricity, there's no functioning economy. And daily life is becoming increasingly harsh. Now President Donald Trump has gone further, saying Cuba would come after Iran as part of a broader push against governments Washington sees as adversaries.
And Cuba's next, by the way, but pretend I didn't say that, please. Pretend I didn't say that. Please, 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 media, please disregard that statement. Thank you very much. Cuba's next.
Here, the government says it's preparing for the worst, vowing to resist whatever the cost. So how far could this confrontation go? Josefina Vidal, Cuba's deputy foreign minister, talks to Al Jazeera. Deputy Foreign Minister Josefina Vidal, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. I'd like to start...
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Mine as well. I'd like to start by telling or taking you back 10 years when you played a vital role in the negotiations between the United States and Cuba to renew diplomatic ties after more than half a century of hostilities. But unfortunately, that rapprochement lasted a very, very short time. What do you think is going to happen this time around?
And at that time, it wasn't Cuba's choice. I mean, it finished not because we put an end to that rapprochement. I have to remind that we fulfill all our commitments. And unfortunately, it was the United States government, the one who decided to dismantle everything that together we built for about 2 years for the benefit of our two peoples. So we have always thought that dialogue is what we have to have between our two countries. We have always seen that dialogue is what can bring our countries closer together, that can solve the differences that might exist, and look for common ground for civilized coexistence for mutual benefit.
But what is it that you think that the Trump administration really wants?
I think the way in which you phrase your question, I think it has to be asked to the U.S. government what they want. We know what we want. Confrontation has been, unfortunately, part of our very long history, mutual history between Cuba and the United States. But we have always thought that promoting dialogue is the most important thing for us to solve our differences.
But the differences that you have go far beyond, an economic system. They're not the same differences that, for example, the United States has with other communist countries like, for example, China or Vietnam. You are 90 miles or 130 kilometers away from the United States, and you have been a thorn, your government has been a thorn in the side of the United States ever since 1959.
But you know, I have never seen the United States having any problems to have normal, civilized relations with other countries which have different political systems or which organize their own countries in ways that respond to their own interests. So the question would be, why is it not possible with Cuba? We would believe that it would be possible for Cuba. The only thing we will always ask is respect, total respect for our independence, for our sovereignty, not to interfere in our internal affairs. Beyond that, we see there are a lot of possibilities for Cuba and the United States to coexist, to work together, to identify areas in which we can cooperate, in which we can build a respectful relationship, taking into consideration our closeness, the history that brings us together, because there are cultural and even human ties, personal ties between people in Cuba and in the United States. So we always would think that it is possible, why not? And we demonstrated 10 years ago that it was possible for Cuba and the United States, regardless of our differences, to work together, to discuss things to do together, and not making our differences the center of our relationship, and look beyond that for the benefit of both of us.
So when I say that this is a domestic issue for the United States, or certainly for members of the Republican parties particularly, I'm referring to the fact that there is a very powerful Cuban-American community. They have members in Congress. They have a strong political influence, and now they have a foreign minister or a secretary of state, Marco Rubio, who has said that the only way to bring about change in Cuba and to bring about a normal relationship with Cuba is for there to be regime change.
I don't see any reason why Cuba would need to renounce its independence and sovereignty in order to accommodate what the United States would like to have in its relationship with Cuba. So any country which respects itself, any country which is responsible in its international relations with the rest of the world, wouldn't put on the table, I mean, in any negotiation, its internal affairs. It's a matter to be decided by the population of any country. So, and this is what Cuba would always defend. So we are ready to talk about everything with the United States. We are ready to have a negotiation with the United States, to put many things on the table to discuss with the United States, with one exception. And this exception is Cuba's independence, Cuba's sovereignty, and Cuba's sovereign decision to decide about its own system and the organization of its society. It's a matter to be decided only by the Cuban people.
Well, the Trump administration says that Cuba represents an unusual and extraordinary, and I'm quoting, unusual and extraordinary threat to its national security. What do you interpret from that?
You know, Cuba is not a threat to anyone. Cuba is a country of peace. Cuba is a friendly country. Cuba is a country that has shown and shows always solidarity towards other peoples and countries. I would say, in the other way, that the United States has been not an unusual, a usual threat for Cuba all along his history, and it's not only the last 67 years, because the United States has always looked at Cuba with other interests, interests of domination, and that's why it has always been such an important factor in the history of Cuba. So I would say that Cuba doesn't pose any threat to the United States. It's the United States which has always been a threat for Cuba.
Well, right now I understand that there are what Cuba calls a dialogue, what President Trump calls negotiations taking place discreetly behind the scene. We believe that Raúl Castro, former President Raúl Castro, and the current President Díaz-Canel are sort of heading these talks, but from afar, that it is Raúl Castro's grandson who might have been physically present in some discussions with the U.S. Secretary of State. But were these talks a one-off, or is this something that is continuing?
As our president explained very clearly a few days ago, we are just in the first phase of this conversation, let's say. There has been one meeting, he explained, he said very clearly. There's been one meeting. I won't get into details about the nature of the meeting or the content of the meeting or who is talking to whom, but this is the first step in what we have always seen as a solution for our problems, to have a responsible, serious dialogue with the United States.
And while you're having this one meeting, the President of the United States is repeatedly saying that he is going to take over Cuba and that he will do, quote, whatever he wants with Cuba because your country is collapsing. What do you say to that?
It's a fact that the United States government has made threats against Cuba. We don't see any justification for the United States threatening Cuba, for the United States expressing this kind of views towards Cuba. And of course, we will defend our country. It would be naive if we ignore the threat that the United States poses to Cuba. Is not new, as I said, because of the long history of confrontation that has prevailed, unfortunately, in our bilateral relationship. But as a result of that, we have always given priority to national defense, and we will continue doing that.
Is it realistic, though, to expect that Cuban armed forces, Cuban citizens, if they were armed and told to defend this country from a U.S. aggression, could do anything against the world's greatest military superpower?
We will defend our country. We are resolutely determined to defend Cuba, and this is not new. Has always been our position, and it's been one of the first priorities of our country, to defend Cuba. Cuba is a peaceful country, a friendly country, but we will always be ready to defend our sovereignty and independence in case it is necessary.
You are talking about a conversation, a dialogue, what hopefully would become a negotiation, but why would this be any different than what happened, for example, with Iran or with Venezuela? They were negotiating with the United States when they were attacked. And the negotiations that were, the agreement that was reached with Venezuela afterwards was done with, one could say metaphorically, with a gun up to the head of the current president, the acting president of Venezuela. Are you holding conversations with a gun held up to your head?
We are holding conversations because that has been coherent with Cuba's historic position and practice, that dialogue is the only way and the only alternative for us to solve problems, differences, and to look for a solution to those difficulties and problems with the United States government. This is our position, and this is not new. So you have seen that in the past in our relationship with the United States, different episodes of dialogue, because Cuba has always believed that dialogue is the only alternative and the only solution.
That may very well be the case, but I think it would be fair to say that the situation, the confrontation, the hostility between the United States and Cuba, whoever initiated it, has never been as intense as it is right now since the Bay of Pigs invasion or the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was back in the very early 1960s. Wouldn't you agree?
Maybe. But again, our position is coherent with our history, so I don't see any reason why Cuba's position would change.
No, but you have no petrol. You have no electricity. You have constant blackouts. The country and its people are suffocating. I think is the word that Cuba uses constantly. It's suffocating, and nobody is offering to come to your rescue anymore, like in the old days with the Soviet Union, or later on when the Venezuelans were able to come and support you with petrol and other means. But now none of that is happening. It looks very much like Cuba is alone in this.
Cuba is not alone, and we don't feel alone. But at the same time, we are not sitting with, crossed hands, waiting for a magical solution to our problems. So in the middle of this suffocation that you rightly said that is being imposed through this energy blockade of Cuba, we are looking for every possibility in order to increase the production of our own national oil. It is not enough, but at least with that oil, we can produce 50% of the energy that Cuba consumes. At the same time, we're accelerating investment in solar parks so that we can double in a matter of 1 year the production of energy through renewable sources of energy. But of course, we will need to import oil because no economy, no country can function without fuel oil, unfortunately enough. And that's why we are asking and we are warning and the word that this blockade has to be lifted. We are receiving the support of different countries in our claim for this to end, because there is no justification for any country to subject the Cuban population to such harsh measures that has devastating humanitarian consequences for our population. But Cuba is not alone. We have been receiving support for other countries in order to facilitate and to help us in our plans to look for solutions to the situation and the difficulties we are living through. And we are sure that we will continue receiving the support of other countries, and with our own efforts, we will find a solution. But at the same time, that measure, that U.S. coercive measure, which affects the whole Cuban population, has to end. There is no justification at all, not even political justification, in order to submit one population of 11 million people to such harsh measures.
But what about China? What about Russia? These are major powers. It's been 3 months since the Cuban state has received 1 drop of oil from anywhere. Why haven't the Russians defied this blockade, or the Chinese?
I won't enter into any details about what we are doing in order to solve these problems, but that has to end. That has to end because it's cruel. It has humanitarian costs. It has caused great concern of UN agencies, of the United Nations system in general, about the humanitarian effect and the humanitarian situation that such a measure can create.
What do you say to Cubans out on the street? I'm not even going to quote human rights organizations, which I know you don't agree with what they have to say, but if you speak to ordinary Cubans, not all of them, in fact a great many of them, do not blame the United States. They blame your government and your system for having taken so long, for having resisted economic change, the kind of economic change that we've seen in every single communist-run country except for North Korea.
I wouldn't agree with that because, the economic changes have been happening in Cuba for quite a while. Because Cuba has changed, because the Cuban population has changed, because the external environment has changed in the last 30, 40 years. So it is not the first time that Cuba has been trying to introduce changes in our functioning, in our economy. By the way, since 2011, we have made many transformations in our economy. Now the economic environment in Cuba is totally different from what existed 30 years ago. You see a more varied, different kinds of property coexisting in the country, and there is a plan. I wouldn't say that we have not made our own mistakes managing and running the economy. It happens in every country, even more so when you are subject to such a difficult, overwhelming, cruel system of sanctions, of measures, coercive measures by the biggest superpower like the United States. We have a plan. We have identified recently, 2 years ago, problems and mistakes and distortions that we have to correct in our economy. But the United States is trying to change the narrative and trying to put blame on what is its responsibility on the Cuban government. And I am sure, and I know that the majority of the Cuban population can distinguish very easily which is the responsibility of the United States in the current situation that we are having. Because we are not the ones who provoked to have this energy blockade. We are not the ones who have submitted Cuba to this situation. And it's very clear for everyone that the United States is trying to put the blame on us when everybody knows, and the whole the majority of the international community knows very well. Otherwise, 165 countries wouldn't have supported Cuba just 4 months ago when we submitted the resolution to put an end to the U.S. blockade at the United Nations General Assembly.
Before returning a little bit to the economy, though, your government says that it is willing to make, I don't know if the word was concessions, but accommodations with the United States. What accommodations could it make?
Again, this is not new. As I said already, we are ready and willing and open to put on an agenda of negotiations with the United States every issue, with one exception, which is independence, sovereignty, and internal affairs. But everything else can be put on the table for the United States to participate, for example, in our economic transformations. Why not? We have been promoting foreign investment in our country. The United States is the only one which so far cannot participate in those opportunities, but not because of Cuba's choice, because it is prohibited by the United States blockade or embargo legislations towards Cuba, and there could be cooperation in any area. You can name it. It could be law enforcement, it could be the combat against drug trafficking or international organized crime, or the environmental issues, educational activities, culture, scientific questions. So there is endless possibilities for Cuba and the United States to work together, and for the United States to participate in our development program. So that gives you an idea of the different opportunities, and Cuba is open for opportunities.
Well, you say that that the United States or United States citizens, be they of Cuban origin or not, can't invest in Cuba. But actually, 4 years ago, under President Biden, there was an agreement, there was an exception made to this. But in Cuba, it was very difficult. The legal framework was never really made possible. And I have the feeling that in Cuba, the government has always felt that if too many people and too much capital comes in from the United States, and the economy is opened up as in other countries around this area and in the Caribbean, the government of Cuba will lose power.
You know, this is not exactly the way you put it, because as far as I know, there has been Cubans living abroad who have been participating in our economy through different modalities in the last 3-4 years. And our Ministry of Foreign Trade just announced this month, at the beginning of this month, that we will expand even more those possibilities, and with new regulations that are being issued in order for Cubans living abroad to be able to participate even more in our economy.
What do you think that what's happening to Cuba now says for the rest of Latin America? We've already seen the example of Venezuela, we know what's happening in Iran, but Latin America has not come out in support of of your country the way one might have expected. It's very divided. Your own region.
So let's wait until the next time we submit our resolution to put an end to the blockade to the UN General Assembly, but this is not what we saw last year in November, when the overwhelming majority of the world, with a couple of exceptions in our region, supported that long claim by Cuba. Because this is what the Cuban people deserve, that this system of sanctions, the longest that has ever existed, finishes.
When President Trump and others say that this country is on the verge of collapse, what would you say to them?
I don't know, they are so focused on collapse. Do you see collapse? Maybe another country, under the conditions we are living in now, would have collapsed, but you don't see that so far in Cuba. The difficulties are big, huge. People have been submitted to, stress. Hospitals are working under stress. The whole economy is under stress.
Exactly.
But again, you are not seeing a collapsed country, even though we haven't been able to import oil for 3 months. So we have our own resources, our own reserves in Cuba. This is not the first time we are living through very difficult times, and we have always found a way to get out of that situation. So we have always been optimistic, and because of our own efforts and because we are not alone, and we know that we are not alone, but I am not going to get into details because we have to protect ourselves. We know that we will get out of this situation. We know that.
Deputy Foreign Minister Josefina Vidal, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Lucia.